Welcome to True Drew Podcast, your source for all things Nancy Drew. I'm your host, Avery, and on this podcast, we'll discuss everything from the Nancy Drew books, to computer games, to movie adaptations, and TV shows. Nothing is off the table. So if you're a True Drew, you'll definitely want to tune in for this podcast. Hello again, True Drews. We're going to do another bonus episode this week, and I'm going to break down all of my thoughts on the newest Nancy Drew game, Mystery of the Seven Keys. I completed the game on Friday. It took me roughly 15 to 16 hours to complete the game as soon as it came out on Tuesday, and the rest of the week I would block off like, okay, I've got a couple hours to work on it today and play it, but it kind of goes without saying, but if you don't want any aspects of the game spoiled for you, you might want to skip this episode and come back to it after you've played the game. We're going to talk about the culprit, the atmosphere, graphics, a little bit of everything, but key points of the plot will be discussed in this episode, so I just want to give you a big enough warning up front. If that doesn't bother you at all, feel free to listen, and I just thought it would be cool to discuss because I just finished playing the game and I've got all these things fresh on my mind. So, Mystery of the Seven Keys, this game has been several years in the making. In fact, the last game that we got was Midnight in Salem, and that came out 5 years ago in 2019, which kind of blows my mind. But this is game 34, and a lot has changed. But also, one of the things I loved about this game is that they called back a lot of the nostalgic elements to the Nancy Drew games that we love so much. Now, I kind of mentioned this in my previous bonus episode where we talked about my predictions for Mystery of the Seven Keys and what we knew at that point before the game released, but Midnight in Salem was a whole new operating system, Unity, and a lot of people weren't used to that free roaming. They loved the point and click, but one of the cool things about Mystery of the Seven Keys is you can choose between free roaming, moving around in Nancy's world, or you can do the classic point and click, and that's what I opted to do when I played, and I loved it. Now, it wasn't completely free of its issues. We'll get to that a little bit later in the episode, but I just love the fact that they listened to their fans enough to be like, hey, they love the classic point-and-click computer games, and we're going to bring that back for them. And I'm not going to lie, being a part of the HerInteractive launch team for Mystery of the Seven Keys, that has been so cool, and it's something that I could have never pictured myself doing as a kid, because these games were such a huge part of my childhood, and to be asked by the company that makes them to help with promotion on social media was it's probably been one of the coolest moments of my life. Now, I kind of talked about the game cover for this game when I did my other bonus episode, but knowing now what I know after having played it gives me a little bit more enlightenment about what we're seeing. But this square that is pictured on the cover is the one that Nancy gets to travel around in, and the puppet stand in the background, it's like a little theater on wheels. That is Radek's marionette theater, and we get to do a lot of things with that in the game, which is really cool. This whole cover is gorgeous. The purples, the orange, the yellow, you can see the iconic skyline of Prague, and then you have this big key at the top with light shining out of the keyhole, and Nancy's silhouette is actually holding a flashlight too, which is really cool. I didn't pay attention to that last episode, but I would give this game cover 5 magnifying glasses. It's beautiful. It evokes what I felt when I was playing the game. I feel like it was spot on. Now, as far as the characters and suspects go for this game, there were 9 suspects, and I loved this because in a lot of the Nancy Drew games, especially the earlier ones, there's 2 to 4, and that's still a good amount, but having 9 people to try and guess, like, who's guilty, who is committing this crime, that made it very interesting for me. Now, we knew a few of these people's names in the last episode that I did on Mystery of the Seven Keys, but there is Adela Cherna. She is the blonde woman with the purple sweater who approaches us in the beginning in the coffee shop. There is Patrice, who is a woman wearing an apron, and she's got like a pink pixie cut. She is the coffee shop owner. There is Vladania, and she is a jewelry appraiser. She's got like dark brown, short hair, and she wears a blazer. There's Oscar Dvorak, who is a curator at the museum. There's Radek Napovim, who's a puppeteer. And Elka Strozhenik is the blonde girl. She's got her hair pulled up in a ponytail and has a sun on her shirt. There is Merrick Stroznik, who is Elka's grandfather, Leo Sokol, who is a priest, and Zane Garrett, who is a cybersecurity agent. So there's quite a few characters in this one. Oh yeah, so I didn't describe what Oscar looks like. Oscar is wearing more of like a suit and a bow tie. He's got like a goatee, a beard. Radek is wearing a yellow sweater and like the cargo pants, brown hair. Merrick, Elka's grandfather, he's wearing like a blue sweater vest and he's got a gray beard, gray hair. Leo, the priest, he's wearing like a green sweater vest, little spectacles. And Zane is African American. He's wearing like a purple cloak and a really nice dress shirt. You've probably seen me post the characters' picture on my Instagram, but if you do want to check that out or the game cover or anything about Mystery of the Seven Keys, you can check out my Instagram at True Drew Podcast. So as far as the voice actors for these characters goes, we have Brittany Cox reprising her role as Nancy. Scott Carty comes back as Ned Nickerson. Ken Boynton is still doing the voice of Carson Drew. And then for Adela, we have Rachel Hager. For Oscar, he's voiced by Jet Thomason. Radek is voiced by Kieran Regan. Vladania is voiced by Chanel Sampson. Patrice is voiced by Jane Ballard Sampson. Elka is voiced by Kelly Baskin. Leo is voiced by Bo Marie. And Zane is voiced by Rhett George. Oh yeah, and then we also had Frank and Joe. Their voice actors came back. Frank is voiced by Jonah Von Spreken, and Joe is voiced by Rob Jones. And there was another minor character, just a phone character, Hans Fairsinger, who owns, I believe it was Second Shine, which is a jewelry appraisal store. He sounds a lot like Marcus from Captive Curse or Tatsa from Phantom of Venice, but I couldn't find his voice actor. Now, I'm not even going to attempt to do any voice impressions of any of these characters because, I've only played the game once. I don't feel like I would do a good enough job. But okay, well, I could do Merrick, who is Elka's grandfather. He is always saying Dobro din, which I think is good afternoon or hello. I think it's hello in Czech. Okay, so I'll read a little game synopsis real quick and then we'll jump right into discussing the game. Nancy is invited to Prague on behalf of Adela Cherna to help her find her mother's missing jewels from an heirloom necklace, but Nancy quickly figures out that nothing is as it seems. The Residente, history of Prague, and more throw challenges at Nancy at every turn. It's hard to know who's a friend and who's a suspect. Now, one of the things I like to do on these game episodes is talk about the fun hidden things or not so hidden things that you can see in the games. I love allusions to the Nancy Drew books and other games, and I found quite a few of them. So when you're in the cafe that is the central location of this game, you can actually see pictures on the wall of Castle Molloy from The Haunting of Castle Molloy, Venice from Phantom of Venice, and you can see the gate from Treasure in the Royal Tower. And then there's also a picture of the library from Waverly, which is kind of cool. Another really cool thing that they did in this bookstore / coffee cafe is they had books everywhere with all these titles, and it really reminded me of Secrets Can Kill, because you would click on those books in the library and you'd be like, oh, some of these are actually future games or allude to puzzles in future games. But there was actually also Purple Hearted Queen, which is famously written by Beatrice Hotchkiss, one of the characters in Treasure in the Royal Tower, one of our favorite characters from the whole game franchise. And there were even some books written by Charlena Purcell. Another cool nod to past games, there was actually a Whale World sticker on Elka's laptop at Operat, which is the store that she fixes computers at. There is also a Krollmeister tracker at Merrick's, which that's her grandfather. He's got like a shop where he fixes old marionettes and stuff right next door. And the alchemy lab that we find later in this game reminded me a lot of Curse of Blackmore Manor. Oh, and so there's these tunnels that we get to go in. There's actually a staircase in those tunnels that reminds me a lot of the tunnel that we use to get up to the Queen's Tower in Treasure in the Royal Tower. Now, normally this would be the point in the podcast episode where I would talk about Easter eggs, which are literally Easter eggs that you can find in the Nancy Drew games. I didn't find one in this playthrough. I was really just trying to focus on puzzles, and a lot of times Easter eggs are not like necessary to complete the game, but I think I heard from some other players that they found them. I literally found some tiny little wooden eggs in a drawer and I just called it a day. I was like, okay, these are my Easter eggs, like I'm not gonna go, because it seems like most Easter eggs you have to go out of your way and like click this 20 times, or it's hard to find them. So maybe in a few months we'll have a better idea of where those are. I don't know. Now, I also love to talk about the allusions to real life that are in the Nancy Drew games because, let's face it, that's why we love them so much. They have so many things in them that make them seem more real. And the fact that, this looked like Prague. I felt like I was running around on the streets of Prague. The clock tower, all of the stuff, the cafe, it was just all so lifelike. And another cool thing about this game is that there were facts about Prague on the bottom of the loading pages. So when you were going from one location to another, this other screen would flash up with the clock tower, and then at the bottom it would say, did you know that Prague has an elevation of 30,000 feet, or that's not what it was, but you know what I mean. It would have facts about Prague history, which is really cool. Another funny thing that I thought was kind of a reference to real life was there was a book that was kind of making fun of influencers in the coffee cafe, and it said, "What's going on with influencers?" That was the title, and I was like, you know what? What is going on with influencers? I don't know. Now, the next section of this podcast, when we talk about the games, I love to talk about the second chances / deaths, and I probably didn't find all of them. I died or had like near-death accidents quite a few times in this game, but I'm sure there's some that I missed. This wasn't one, but I kept thinking I'm going to burn myself with this milk, steamed milk at the coffee cafe, but it didn't happen. I'm glad it didn't. But it would have been funny. But some of the second chances / deaths you can experience in Mystery of the Seven Keys, you can get killed by the foggy, ghostly night in the tunnels. This was truly traumatizing, and we were going to talk about this some more. But yeah, that's one way. You can get caught snooping in Adela's bag, and you just get like a second chance option. Or you can fall off of scaffolding if you hit it with a hammer. I didn't actually do this. I think actually Arglefump did it in his playthrough, but I didn't do that. Now, before we jump into my notes that I took down for this game, I want to talk about the predictions that I actually got right in last episode that I talked about the Mystery of the Seven Keys. I was absolutely shocked, but I actually got 4 predictions right, or semi-right, like half right, but I actually guessed a character's name correctly. I guessed that the woman in the purple sweater was Adela. I figured that was Adela, and I think I threw out a few other names, but I was thinking, yeah, maybe it's Adela, Anna, Amelia. I was shocked when I got that right. But I also guessed that Vladena was a jewelry appraiser, so I was right there. And I theorized, I was like, it would be really cool if we had some relatives in this game. I miss seeing that, like in past games, it adds another element. Well, Merrick and Elka were relatives, grandfather and granddaughter, so super cool. I was also kind of right about the villain, but we'll get back to that in a second. And we did get to go in some creepy tunnels under a church. It wasn't exactly a crypt. There was a skeleton at one point, which was really scary, but that was super cool. I, just threw ideas out because I was like, I don't really know. Just based on the trailer and what I'm seeing, I'm hoping these might be elements in the game. Now let's jump into the notes that I took on Mystery of the Seven Keys as I was playing it. So first up, as Nancy, you show up to the cafe. I think it's Hungermeister. I'm probably saying that wrong. But you go there to talk to Adela Cherna, who has, called you to Prague to find these missing gems from her heirloom necklace. And you have never seen her before, so you don't really know who you're looking for, but you're waved over to a table by a woman in an apron with pink hair, and she says, "Oh, I'm Adela, it's nice to meet you." And then a few minutes in, the woman in the purple sweater, which we saw from the trailer, comes over and you have to guess who is really Adela. So it's like a little bit of a profiling test or a test on your discernment. Like, how do you know which one is the real Adela? And I just was like, well, this woman's wearing an apron, so she probably works at the cafe and probably wouldn't be able to necessarily afford this necklace. I know that's mean. Like, maybe she could have had it. It could have been like passed down from generation to generation. But there was another context clue. I think it was, I'm pretty sure Nancy asks a question about who gave her the necklace, and it was Adela's mother, and the woman with the pink hair doesn't know the answer to that, so you're like, oh, okay, it's probably you in the purple sweater. I actually low-key loved this because I love when you have to make little, mentalism sort of deductions where you're picking up on cues that the characters are giving you, like, you said this, but your body language says that. Like, I live for that kind of stuff. The biggest puzzle on this earth is the human brain and why people do the things they do. You know what I'm saying? So after you've correctly guessed who Adela is, you talk to her and you get up to speed on what's happened so far, how her jewels went missing, or about the time frame they went missing. And then you can go over and talk to Patrice, who was the woman in the apron with the pink hair, and she apologizes to Nancy, like, sorry, Adela put me up to it. She wanted to test you and see if you're really a good detective. And, I mean, on the one hand, Adela has already asked Nancy to come halfway across the world. Like, she better be pretty sure that she's a good detective. Like, obviously she is. But then I guess also Adela is also very paranoid because she's trusted people that she shouldn't have trusted, obviously, or else the jewels wouldn't be missing. But anyway, Patricia asks Nancy, do you have someone waiting for you back home? And Nancy says, yeah, and she's talking about Ned. But she says, he's not really waiting for me. He has his own life. I didn't really take this as a catty response from Nancy. I just took it as a, me and Ned are equals. He's not waiting for me. I'm not waiting for him. Like, we're obviously in a relationship and it's equal parts work on both ends. I didn't think it was catty. I think it was just her kind of telling Patricia, like, yeah, we're in a relationship, but we're kind of doing our own things too. So the next thing that I have in my notes is the next task that we're supposed to accomplish in the game, and we're supposed to find a postcard and a pen, and we can write a note to Ned. I thought this was really sweet and reminiscent of the letters in the older games, because the older games, any Nancy Drew fan knows that they started and ended with a letter, so I thought this was cool that they included this. So the next thing that I wrote down is, according to Patricia, Nancy is a cappuccino, and I was like, okay, she cannot be the villain because she likes coffee. Like, she can't be that bad. But I thought it was funny that she, gives everybody like, oh, well, your personality is more of like a flat white, or you're this, or... So I just thought that was kind of cool. I don't know. I think it is kind of funny to analyze people's coffee or tea orders. Like, I love a good chai and matcha if we're talking tea, but I really like a brown sugar latte if we're talking coffee. Also, Nancy ordered a croissant, which made me want a croissant while I was playing this game. But this next thing we have to do in the cafe is we get to make coffee and do all this latte art. And so it took me, I don't want to admit how long it took me to figure out how to steam the milk, and then also the latte art itself. Like, I thought it was going to be like the puzzle from Secret of the Old Clock. You're sewing the dress, or you're writing Nancy's name in Shadow at the Water's Edge, but you had to hold the cream over the coffee for so long, and you had to fill in the lines like perfectly. Once I figured that out, I was golden. Once I figured out that you had to hold that down for forever. But if you follow Half Moon Joe on Instagram, he was doing videos of him trying to figure out this latte art, and it was hilarious. The next thing that I have down is when you're talking to Adela, she talks about her mother, and she says she wasn't particularly close to her, but she also says she would pour herself a glass. And I thought this was funny because, HerInteractive always skates around. Like, there's no direct references to alcohol. Like, Nancy is just in a pub in The Haunting of Castle Malloy serving what we can assume are some kind of alcoholic drink. Maybe they're not. There's like a raccoon on the logo and stuff, but it's just funny. I mean, I appreciate that they do this, but it's also funny. I mean, most of us playing Mystery of the Seven Keys are older or are adults, but when we were playing like Haunting of Castle Malloy and some of those other games, we were children. So this next thing that I took note of bothered me, but Vladania, who is the jewelry appraiser, she likes to slam Nancy for everything from her style to how tired she looks. This reminded me of Margarita Faubourg in Phantom of Venice. Like, oh, Nancy, that blouse, you should change it. It was just very reminiscent of that, but Vladania is like, Nancy says, I'm ready to go and solve this mystery. I'm well rested. And Vladania's like, oh, My mistake. I thought you weren't. Like, is she cracking on the fact that Nancy might have, like, under eye circles or something? Like, she did just take a flight from River Heights to Prague, so, I mean, she probably has jet lag, but just to say that is like, I don't know. And she just came across as such a snob. The next thing that I wrote down is the haunted tour is really cool. So at the museum, there's all these exhibits that you get to look at, and then you can click on this sign and go take a haunted tour, and it gets dark outside, and it was really weird. At first I thought like somebody was going to rob the place, like someone had thrown a smoke bomb, but it's literally like the smoke is all over the floor and stuff, and you just walk in there and there's this creepy voice narrating everything, and this knight in shining armor is just like glinting in the moonlight. It was really spooky and creepy. Okay, so this next thing I was a little bit disappointed in, but Leo, who is the priest, he brings up the fact that, oh, there's this game and it's called Marios. It's supposed to be a lot like Scopa, but we keep finding cards in different locations during the game. We never got to play it with him, so that made me sad. I really wanted to see what the game was like. So this next thing scared me so bad, but you get this file called the DeGoss file from the Hardy Boys, and you're supposed to unscramble this image to look at it on your laptop, and then this image pops up of this just face. It's green and glowing, and it scared me so bad because I wasn't expecting it. It was like one of those videos that people will send you, and it's like, oh, you know, look at this, look really close, and then it just like slams into the screen, and it's just, ugh. So it got me good. The next thing that I wrote down is we get to snoop a lot in this game, which is so cool. So we get to snoop at Opera, the computer repair store that Elka works at. We get to snoop at Merrick's, pretty much everywhere. We get to snoop at Radix, every suspect. We get to look through their stuff, which I love doing. I mean, you're talking to somebody who likes to go to estate sales, which is basically just a yard sale of everyone's things, so I love snooping. The next note that I took down is when you're leaving the computer shop Opera, there's a creepy shadow and a note, and this reminded me of so many of the older games, Message in a Haunted Mansion, Final Scene, you know, where you get all these notes and threats to stop what we're doing, and I loved it. It just feels more like a mystery when you're having to snoop and when you're getting threatened to stop snooping. So this next note kind of has to do with Nancy's lack of sensitivity training. Like, she goes to solve all these mysteries and she's always like, how did so-and-so die? And the people are just like, ugh. Really, Nancy? But she talks to Elka and Merrick about the death of Elka's mother and Merrick's daughter, but she's way more sensitive about it. Like, she still, you know, compares. She says, yeah, I lost my mom at a young age, but I don't really consider that inconsiderate. I feel like that's just you're sharing with someone. Like, I understand in a way, not completely, but in a way. But she doesn't like poke into people's business as much, you know. She just is sort of like, she's just way more sensitive. So the next note that I wrote down is, oh my gosh, we do get to go in some creepy tunnels. So it's not a crypt. There is a weird skeleton on the ground at one point, which was like, that's scary. But we get chased by this ghostly knight guy, and what's so scary about this is it's not like it's running at you super fast. It's just kind of sort of slowly moving towards you with like these clanking chain noises, like, and this is honestly one of my nightmares. Like, I have a couple recurring nightmares, but one of them is when somebody's after you but they just take their time because they know they're going to get you in the end. Like, that is so much more scary to me than somebody just running full tilt after me. So needless to say, my anxiety was at an all-time high when I was trying to get out of those tunnels. I could not figure it out, and I was just so frustrated. I was like, I kept running into walls and gates that you couldn't get through, so it took me a very long time to get out of there. So the next thing that I really loved about this game is when we get to mess with the knight in the museum for a puzzle. Nancy says, you shouldn't touch things at a museum, but I'll make an exception for this. Like, what was the entirety of Secret of the Scarlet Hand, Nancy? Like, you were literally running a museum as an 18-year-old girl and touching all the Mayan artifacts and removing them from cases. So I just thought this was really funny. The next thing that I took a note of was this was just really sweet, but when Nancy is solving the clock puzzle, Ned quizzes her about their first date, and she remembers they went to Scoop and got ice cream. And I just thought this was sweet because a lot of the past few games, there's been a lot of like Nancy, Ned drama, and are they going to break up? And so This also, though, matches the clue in the diary. This is when Nancy and Ned actually first met. Ned, moved Nancy's car for her out of the path of, fiery explosions. And Nancy, Bess, and George were taken by Ned to go get ice cream. So, Bess and George were there, but it was still kind of like their first date. Ned also quizzes Nancy, and he's like, "What flavor ice cream did I have?" And Nancy was like, "You had Minty Madness, and you spilled it all over your shoes." And so this, I felt like, was kind of HerInteractive, like they're trying to do damage control on Nancy a little bit. They're like, she remembers stuff, what kind of ice cream Ned was eating. She may not remember their anniversary, but she remembers the important things. Okay, so the next few things we're going to talk about are major spoiler alerts. So if you've listened to this point, I don't think it would really ruin the game at all, but if you don't want to know who's guilty, you should probably stop listening, now. So it's at this point in the game when Nancy starts to realize, this ghostly night figure thing keeps chasing me, and maybe somebody's tracking me. Somebody's tracking my phone or something. So she devises this plan to trap the person who's following her, and she puts her phone up on this scaffolding and then stacks all these boxes to where they're going to fall on somebody when they're coming to find her and triangulate her phone's position. And so Nancy hides, and she sees this thing walk past. It looks like the pictures from your anatomy class where you see all the musculature and bones and stuff, and it's really creepy looking. It's the skeleton knight guy. And so all the boxes fall on him, and Nancy yells at the person and is like, "Reveal who you are." So the figure takes off its helmet, and it's Radek. And I thought, is this the end of the game? Is he the villain? But then Merrick shows up, and he and Radek are conversing in Czech together. And then they start to talk to Nancy, and they say basically they've been used by this group called, I think it's Lukaja is this crime group. It sounds a lot like the one from Phantom of Venice. But Nancy tells Merrick and Radek that they can team up. They can catch these people. So they were told to leave these keys at a drop point in the square. So Merrick comes up with this tracking device, and they put it in there. And so then Nancy is able to catch the villains. So as Nancy, we follow around this tracking beam, and we're trying to find this person, and it's a lot harder than the one in Phantom of Venice. I knew it was probably going to end up in those creepy tunnels, and it did. And you go down to this alchemy lab that you found a little bit earlier in the game, and it's Vladena. So I'm glad it wasn't Patrizia, because she makes a great cup of coffee, but Vladena has this big villain speech, and Nancy is like, "You were friends with Adela. You were helping her get the jewels appraised. Why would you turn around and betray her like that?" And so Vladena just gives this grand speech, and then she poisons us. So I made a prediction in the last episode on Mystery of the Seven Keys, and I was like, maybe it's this girl. I didn't know her name at the time, or I was like, maybe it's this guy with the bow tie who's Oscar. But this was crazy, and she poisons us. It's like, I was like, poisoned in Prague. That just sounds like a Nancy Drew book. But we have to figure out the antidote. So once you're able to figure out the antidote, you go through the passageway and chase Vladena. And then you hear from Merrick and Radek on the pager that they gave you for tracking the villain. And you're supposed to get through this door to go after her. And they say, "Hey, we're going to send Elka. Elka's coming." And then when Elka comes, she reveals that she's in on it with Vladena. This was such an incredible twist. I was not expecting this. I was hoping maybe we would get multiple villains, but it just blew my mind. And Nancy asks her, she's like, "You're betraying your grandfather. Why would you do that?" And she's mad at him because he kind of, you find out in the game, but he sort of had a part in her mother's death, unfortunately. Not, it was an accident, but Elka blames him for it. So as Nancy, you're able to get through the door and trick Elka and get into where Vladena is. And oh yeah, by the way, she has Leo hostage, the priest, because he went missing earlier in the game. I forgot to mention that, but he goes missing, and Nancy's trying to find him, and he was supposed to get on a plane to go to Rome for some kind of conference. But he's there, and Vladania has a knife, and she threatens Nancy, and she's like, put these jewels on this crown. So the whole time, it's been more about, Adela's jewels, but then in the background, there's also this plot to take the crown jewels of Prague. So right before Nancy came through the door, she yanked this ring off of Elka's finger, and this ring apparently can tase people, is what she told Nancy casually within 5 minutes of meeting her, which is crazy. But Nancy is like, oh, okay, if I can hide this ring on the crown, I might be able to get it to tase Vladania. So you hide it in the crown jewels, and when Vladania puts the crown on her head, it just like tases her and she falls over. It's like the most epic ending I've seen in a while for a Nancy Drew game. So then while Vladania's knocked out and Leo is recovered, he's standing up, you can go around and adjust these. You have to click these candelabras in the right order, and it's pretty easy once you figure it out. But you're able to get out with Leo and go to the police, and they arrest Elka. But according to the game, Vladania actually gets away. She's not captured by the police. And is it Vladania? Vladana? I think I've said it both ways, but it reminds me of Vidalia, which is an onion. And to quote Shrek, villains are a lot like onions. They have lots of layers. I don't know, we might see Vladana come back in a later game. So next, I wrote down some of the funnier quotes from this game. So the first one is one I mentioned earlier, but Nancy says, "I'm rested and ready to go," and Vladania says, "You don't look it. My mistake." Oh yeah, so Nancy brought back the classic line from Ghost Dogs of Moon Lake. She picks up a screwdriver and she says, "I gotta have some torque." And then when Nancy's on the phone with Ned, she says, "Do you think Dad would have someone fluent in Czech to help her out with something?" And Ned says, "Not last time I checked. I didn't mean to do that." Joe Hardy also references Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon on the phone, and he says something about riding a train and finding treasure on the tracks. And then Leo, the priest, says, "Not the usual tourist question." And Nancy says, "I'm not the usual tourist." And then the last funny quote was Oscar was so surprised that Nancy opens this artifact at the museum, and he says, "You open the artifact?" And Nancy says, "It's kind of my thing." Now, as far as the best and worst puzzles go, I really liked most of the puzzles in this game. I liked Spot the Difference in the jewelry authenticating, the puppet show, book text codes around the cafe, the artifact reliquary thing you have to open in the museum, jewel trunk, snow globe key, candle puzzle, crown puzzle. All of these were really good. The only puzzle I really wasn't a fan of was the cyber block, which is this thing you have to get around in your computer to get rid of viruses. That was not my favorite. Now, as far as the music rating goes, I already played a couple clips of the music in the last Mystery of the Seven Keys episode, so you can listen to it there. I would give the music a 2 magnifying glass rating. It's not the best. It's merely in the background. It's not very atmospheric to me. I think there's much better Nancy Drew soundtracks. This one just didn't do it for me. But as far as giving this game a magnifying glass rating overall, I would give it 4 magnifying glasses. I thought it was well worth the wait and a very good game. It had an amazing atmosphere, so many random people, like even aside from the suspects, there were just people milling around, like taking pictures and being tourists and sitting at the cafe, which was really cool. There was also a really cool like transition from day to night. I liked getting to explore Prague at different times of the day, and it was good. The only complaints I would have are maybe the music. There was no clear melodies to that, and I loved the point and click option, but I will say it was a tad touchy. It was hard to find things on the ground, so free roaming may be better for finding things on the ground, but otherwise it was great. So yeah, that concludes today's episode for Mystery of the Seven Keys and my review of it. After I've played the game now, I felt like I had a lot more to say because, last week's episode, I was just speculating because I didn't really know. I'd only seen the trailer, but I love this game and I will definitely be playing it again. And the download process, because it is a digital game, it's not available on CD-ROM. It's super easy, super straightforward, and it worked great on my computer. Also, if you're interested in purchasing the game, I will include a link in the description for this episode if you want to, go buy the game and play it first before you listen to this episode. I don't blame you one bit. So yeah, there's just so much accomplishment that comes from completing a Nancy Drew game. And one last thing. I did this game with not very many hints at all. I did it on amateur level because I know myself. I know that about me. I need a task list, but I really didn't ask for many hints. I just figured it out as I went, and that is such a good feeling. So since this episode is coming out in the earlier part of the week, the next episode you'll see come up on the podcast is going to be the episode for the book, The Clue of the Black Keys. So I will see you then. Thank you for listening to this episode of True Drew Podcast. If you'd like to stay up to date on the latest information and new episodes, our Instagram is True Drew Podcast. Or for general inquiries, you can email us at truedrewpodcast@gmail.com.